My name is Dylan Williams, a 68-year-old retired architect from Boston. When Margaret died last year, I kept two secrets: her generous pension and our beautiful villa in Valencia. I noticed how Benjamin started visiting more often, asking about finances with unusual interest. Then came the text, "Dad, I sold the house. Start packing." I smiled at my phone. My bags were already packed, tickets purchased. What Benjamin didn't know was they weren't my destination. Before I continue, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and subscribe for more real-life stories. Margaret and I shared 42 wonderful years together before cancer took her away. We met at Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1975. I was studying architecture while she pursued education. Her beautiful brown eyes caught my attention during a campus fundraiser. I still remember how she laughed when I nervously spilled punch on my shirt while trying to impress her. That laugh would brighten our home for decades to come. After graduation, I joined a prestigious architecture firm in Boston, while Margaret began teaching elementary school. We married in a small ceremony with just close family and friends present. Benjamin came along 3 years later, our only child. Margaret took a few years off to raise him before returning to education with renewed purpose. Her dedication and natural leadership eventually led her to become principal of one of Boston's most respected public schools. Our home in Boston was my first major design project. A beautiful Victorian-style house in a quiet neighborhood with large windows that let in plenty of natural light, just the way Margaret liked. The kitchen had a breakfast nook where we spent countless mornings planning our days over coffee. The backyard garden became Margaret's pride and joy after she retired. We spent 35 years in that house, filling every corner with memories. As for Benjamin, he was our pride and joy, though raising him wasn't without challenges. Perhaps we spoiled him too much, always giving him what he wanted. Margaret worried about this more than I did, but I assured her most children grow out of entitlement eventually. Unfortunately, Benjamin never quite did. Despite our hopes that he would pursue higher education, Benjamin dropped out of college after just 2 semesters. He claimed formal education was for people who couldn't think outside the box. Instead, he jumped from one get-rich-quick scheme to another. There was the internet startup that folded after 6 months, the cryptocurrency investment that wiped out his savings, and various sales positions he could never keep for long. His financial troubles became a regular feature in our lives. Every few months, Benjamin would show up needing money for rent, car payments, or to clear some debt. Margaret and I helped him countless times, always hoping this would be the last. We even helped finance his wedding to Amanda, a sweet girl who unfortunately couldn't handle Benjamin's unstable lifestyle. Their marriage lasted less than 5 years, with no children, much to Margaret's disappointment. 7 years ago, our lives took an unexpected turn during what was supposed to be a simple European vacation. Our flight to Rome was delayed, forcing us to reroute through Valencia, Spain. What started as an inconvenience became a blessing in disguise. The moment we stepped into that coastal Spanish city, Margaret fell in love. The warm Mediterranean air, the friendly locals, the relaxed pace of life all spoke to her soul. "Dylan," she said as we watched the sunset from a small seaside cafe, "I could live here forever." I saw something in her eyes that evening, a spark of joy that had somewhat dimmed over years of worry about Benjamin and the stress of her career. 2 days later, while Margaret was enjoying a spa treatment, I met with a local real estate agent. Finding the perfect villa overlooking the Mediterranean wasn't easy, but when I saw it, I knew it was meant for us. Using some of our retirement savings, I made a down payment that very day. On Margaret's 60th birthday, I handed her a small box. Inside wasn't jewelry as she expected, but a key and a photograph of our new Spanish villa. Her tears of joy made every penny worth it. We decided to keep our Spanish home a secret, even from Benjamin. It became our private sanctuary, a place where we could escape for a few weeks each year, disconnected from worries and responsibilities. Those brief Valencia vacations were some of our happiest times together. Margaret learned to cook paella from our elderly neighbor, Sophia. I spent mornings sketching the beautiful architecture of the old city. We'd walk hand in hand along the beach every evening, planning how we might spend more time there after fully retiring. But life had other plans. Last year, Margaret began experiencing persistent back pain. After weeks of tests, the diagnosis came back: stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim from the start. Margaret faced it with the same grace and strength she had shown throughout our marriage. During her final months, we had many difficult conversations about what would happen after she was gone. Margaret worried especially about how Benjamin would handle her passing and the inheritance. "He's not equipped to handle money responsibly," she confided one night as I held her increasingly frail hand. "I love our son Dylan, but I fear what he might do if he knew everything we have." That conversation led to several secretive meetings with Margaret's friend Julia, a trust attorney. Margaret was determined to protect me even after she was gone. Her foresight would prove more valuable than I could have imagined. The last 3 months of Margaret's life were both heartbreaking and precious. We decided against aggressive treatment that would only diminish her quality of life. Instead, we focused on comfort care at home, where she could be surrounded by familiar things. I converted our living room into a bedroom, so Margaret could look out at her garden as the spring flowers began to bloom. I became her full-time caregiver, learning to administer medication, helping with personal care, and simply being present. Our longtime family doctor made regular house calls, always bringing Margaret a fresh gardenia, her favorite flower. The hospice nurse, who visited 3 times weekly, became almost like family, teaching me how to make Margaret more comfortable as the disease progressed. During those quiet days, Margaret and I reminisced about our life together. We looked through old photo albums, laughed about vacation mishaps, and shed tears over opportunities missed. We talked about everything from our first date to our deepest regrets. There's something about impending death that strips away pretense and allows for complete honesty. Benjamin visited sporadically during this time, always with an excuse about work commitments or travel difficulties. When he did come, his visits were brief and somewhat awkward. He seemed uncomfortable with his mother's deteriorating condition and often found reasons to step outside for phone calls. Margaret never complained about his absence, but I saw the hurt in her eyes each time he checked his watch or made a quick exit. 2 months before she passed, Margaret insisted on meeting privately with her friend Julia, the trust attorney. They spent an entire afternoon together in our bedroom with the door closed. When Julia left, her eyes were red from crying, but Margaret seemed more peaceful than she had in weeks. "I've taken care of everything," she told me that evening. "Julia will explain it all when the time comes." Margaret slipped away peacefully on a Tuesday morning in April. I was holding her hand, telling her about the hummingbird that had just visited her feeder outside the window. Whether she heard me or not, I like to think she left this world with the image of that tiny, vibrant bird carrying her spirit away. The funeral was simple, just as Margaret wanted. A short service at the small Methodist church we'd attended for decades, followed by a reception at our home. I was touched by how many of Margaret's former students and colleagues came to pay their respects. Several spoke of how she had changed their lives through her mentorship and unwavering belief in their potential. Benjamin arrived late to the service and left the reception early, claiming an important business meeting couldn't be rescheduled. I noticed him taking inventory of the house during the brief time he was there, his eyes lingering on Margaret's antique desk and the painting in the foyer we had purchased on our 20th anniversary trip to France. The day after the funeral, Benjamin called with questions about Margaret's will and finances. Not how I was doing or if I needed anything, but whether there was a life insurance policy and when we could settle the estate matters. I told him Julia would be contacting us soon about the will reading, which seemed to satisfy him temporarily. A week later, we gathered in Julia's office downtown. Her corner office overlooked Boston Harbor, a view Margaret had always admired during our visits. Present were myself, Benjamin, and Julia's paralegal, who would serve as witness. Julia began by expressing her condolences again, before getting down to business. The will Julia read was straightforward. All possessions in the Boston house were left to me, with specific items of jewelry designated for a few close friends. A modest sum of $20,000 was set aside for Benjamin. As Julia read these details, I watched Benjamin's expression change from expectant to confused, to barely concealed anger. "That's it," he interrupted when Julia finished. "Mom was principal for 20 years. There must be retirement accounts, investments, something more." Julia calmly explained that all financial accounts had been jointly held and now transferred to me as the surviving spouse. Benjamin pressed for specific figures, but Julia politely explained that those details were confidential unless I chose to share them. "Dad will need help managing all this," Benjamin said, turning to me with sudden concern. "At your age, financial matters can be overwhelming." I assured him I would be fine and thanked Julia for her time. As we were leaving, Julia asked me to return the following day to sign some additional paperwork. Benjamin offered to come with me, but Julia specified the meeting was for me alone. When I returned to Julia's office the next day, she closed the door and embraced me warmly. "Margaret made me promise to give you this only after the official will reading," she said, handing me a sealed envelope. She wanted to make sure Benjamin wasn't around when you received it. Inside the envelope was a letter in Margaret's handwriting along with several legal documents. The letter began, "My darling Dylan, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I've made arrangements to protect you and ensure your comfort for the years ahead." The documents showed that 6 months before her diagnosis, Margaret had quietly transferred ownership of our Valencia villa solely into my name. She had also established a private pension fund with her retirement savings separate from our joint accounts. This fund would provide me with substantial monthly income that Benjamin would never know about. Her letter continued, "I've watched how Benjamin behaves when he thinks there's money to be had. I fear what might happen to you and our assets after I'm gone. Forgive me for the secrecy, but I needed to make sure you would be taken care of, no matter what." I sat in Julia's office, tears streaming down my face, overwhelmed by Margaret's foresight and love. Even in death, she was protecting me. "There's one more thing," Julia said gently. "Margaret asked me to help you if Benjamin becomes difficult about the house or tries to pressure you into any financial decisions. Everything is prepared if you need to take legal action." I thanked Julia and left with the documents securely in my briefcase, already sensing I would need her help sooner rather than later. Within days of the will reading, Benjamin's behavior underwent a remarkable transformation. The son who had barely found time to visit during his mother's illness suddenly became attentive and concerned. He began calling daily to check on me, sometimes stopping by unannounced with groceries or prepared meals. "Just making sure you're eating properly, Dad," he would say, though I had been cooking for myself and Margaret throughout our marriage. During these visits, Benjamin would casually bring up financial matters. Had I considered downsizing? Was I keeping track of bills? Did I understand how property taxes worked? Each question seemed innocent enough on its own, but together they formed a pattern of someone assessing assets and liabilities. 2 weeks after Margaret's funeral, Benjamin arrived with a man he introduced as my financial advisor friend Gary. Gary's business card, which he pressed into my hand, identified him as a real estate consultant. The two of them suggested we all sit down to discuss my options for the future. "Property values in this neighborhood are at an all-time high," Mr. Williams, Gary explained, not bothering to hide his assessment of our home. "For someone in your position, living alone in such a large house, it makes financial sense to capitalize on that value." I thanked them for their concern, but explained I had no interest in selling the home Margaret and I had shared for 35 years. Benjamin seemed frustrated, but quickly masked it with a smile. "We're just trying to help, Dad. No need to decide anything today." After they left, I received a text from our neighbor Elaine asking if everything was okay. She had seen Benjamin showing someone around our backyard and peering in windows while I was at a doctor's appointment the day before. This was the first I'd heard of such a visit. The next morning, I pretended to leave for my regular coffee meetup with friends, but doubled back after 30 minutes. Entering quietly through the back door, I found Benjamin in Margaret's home office going through her filing cabinet. He jumped when I cleared my throat from the doorway. "Just looking for Mom's recipe for banana bread," he said quickly, though the drawer he had opened contained financial statements and property documents. Later that week, I overheard Benjamin on the phone in our guest bathroom, the water running to mask his voice. I stood silently in the hallway, listening as my son spoke to someone about the old man and getting him settled somewhere manageable. "The house should fetch at least $1.2 million in this market," Benjamin said quietly. "Once he's in Cedar Grove, we can move forward with the sale. Their memory care unit has a waiting list, but I told them it's becoming urgent." Cedar Grove was a low-budget nursing home in the suburbs I had read about in the news recently due to violations in patient care. And I certainly didn't need memory care. Though I was 68, my doctor had just given me a clean bill of health, including a perfect score on the cognitive assessment that was part of my annual physical. Benjamin's deception extended to our social circle as well. I learned from my friend Thomas that Benjamin had been telling people I was becoming forgetful and struggling to maintain the house. He had even approached members of our church community about checking in on me regularly because of my declining health. The culmination of these concerning behaviors came during a Sunday dinner Benjamin insisted on having at our house. He brought takeout from an expensive restaurant, and even a bottle of my favorite whiskey, something completely out of character for my typically frugal son. After pouring me a generous glass, he sat down across from me at the dining table with a folder of brochures. "I've been researching some retirement communities, Dad," he said, sliding a glossy pamphlet toward me. "Cedar Grove has an excellent reputation and activities you'd enjoy." I took a sip of whiskey and carefully examined the brochure, which showed smiling seniors, playing cards, and walking through manicured gardens. Nothing like the facility I had read about. "I'm not interested in moving, Benjamin. I'm perfectly capable of living independently." His friendly demeanor slipped slightly. "It's not about capability, Dad. It's about what makes sense. This house is too big for one person. The stairs could become dangerous. The maintenance is extensive. I appreciate your concern, but I'm staying." Benjamin's expression hardened. "Mom would want you to be practical. She always worried about you being alone in this big house." The mention of Margaret in this manipulation angered me, but I maintained my composure. "Your mother and I discussed our future extensively before she passed. I know exactly what she wanted for me." The conversation grew increasingly tense as Benjamin pressed harder, eventually suggesting that at my age I might not be competent to make these decisions for myself. When I firmly refused again, he stood up abruptly. "Fine, be stubborn, but we'll need to revisit this conversation soon. I'm only trying to help you, Dad." After he left, I poured the remaining whiskey down the sink and went to Margaret's office. The filing cabinet Benjamin had been searching was slightly disorganized. I carefully went through each folder, discovering that several documents related to our house deed and insurance policies were missing. My suspicions fully aroused, I decided to do some investigating of my own. Using Margaret's laptop, which Benjamin didn't know I could access, I checked our shared family email account. There I found messages Benjamin hadn't deleted, including correspondence with a mortgage broker about taking a loan against his father's property. Further searching revealed emails between Benjamin and Gary discussing the potential sale of our house, with lines like, "Once we get him to sign the power of attorney and retirement homes, are always looking for new residents with assets." Most disturbing was an email confirmation for a deposit on a luxury apartment in downtown Boston, dated just 3 days after Margaret's funeral. Benjamin had used $10,000 as a holding fee, money he certainly didn't have based on what Margaret and I knew of his finances. Through careful examination of these communications, I pieced together Benjamin's situation. He had accumulated significant gambling debts, was months behind on his rent, and had recently been laid off from his sales job. He was desperate for money and saw his inheritance as the solution. The truth was painful, but undeniable. My son was planning to sell my home out from under me and place me in a cheap facility, all to solve his financial problems. Margaret had been right to protect me. Now I needed to protect myself. Benjamin's scheme accelerated in the following weeks. He began bringing potential buyers to see the house whenever I had regular appointments. Mrs. Jenkins across the street texted me photos of strangers touring our garden and peering through windows while Benjamin showed them around. "Your son said you've decided to move to assisted living," she wrote. "He asked if we'd be interested in buying some of your furniture before the estate sale." I hadn't authorized any of this, nor had I agreed to move or sell anything. Yet Benjamin was proceeding as if everything was settled. When confronted, he would smile patronizingly and say things like, "We discussed this, Dad. Don't you remember the doctor said your memory might be affected by grief?" No such conversation with any doctor had ever taken place. Benjamin was gaslighting me, attempting to make me question my own mind. If I hadn't been completely lucid, his tactics might have worked. One Tuesday morning, I returned from my weekly breakfast with friends to find a "For Sale by Owner" sign had been placed in our front yard. I promptly removed it and called Benjamin. "What the hell is this about?" I demanded. "Just testing the waters, Dad," he replied casually, "getting a sense of interest in the neighborhood. Nothing official yet." But the very next day, a real estate agent called our home phone asking to schedule a formal appraisal. She seemed confused when I told her the house wasn't for sale. "I have paperwork here signed by Benjamin Williams, with power of attorney for Dylan Williams," she explained. "Everything seems to be in order on our end." I thanked her politely and ended the call, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. Benjamin had apparently forged documents giving him power of attorney over my affairs. This was no longer just manipulative behavior. It was potentially criminal. Meanwhile, Benjamin had been laying groundwork with friends and neighbors, subtly spreading concerns about my mental acuity. He contacted my doctor directly, though thankfully patient confidentiality prevented any information being shared. He even spoke with our pastor, suggesting that the church might want to keep an eye on poor Dad, as he was getting confused more frequently. 3 weeks after Margaret's passing, Benjamin showed up unannounced with boxes and packing materials. "Time to start downsizing, Dad," he announced cheerfully. "I thought we could begin with the guest rooms since you don't use them anyway." Without waiting for my permission, he headed upstairs and began removing items from closets. When I objected, he sighed heavily. "Dad, we've been over this. The house is too much for you to manage. Cedar Grove has a nice one-bedroom apartment waiting, but you can only take what fits in their standard units." I never agreed to Cedar Grove or any facility, I insisted. Benjamin put down the vase he was wrapping and approached me with exaggerated patience. "Mom wanted me to take care of you. This is me doing exactly that. She would want you to be practical about this." Again, invoking Margaret to manipulate me. Benjamin continued his campaign on multiple fronts. He began intercepting my mail, claiming he was helping manage the bills. He contacted our insurance company to discuss options for after the house sale. He even had the audacity to list some of Margaret's antique furniture on an online marketplace, stating that Dad wants to simplify before moving. His most convincing performance came during his attempts to persuade me that Cedar Grove was a luxury facility. He showed me carefully selected photos from their website and testimonials that I later discovered were from an entirely different retirement community. "They have weekly concerts, gourmet meals, and a full-time medical staff," he assured me. "It's like living in a 5-star hotel." Suspicious of these claims, I asked my friend Thomas to drive me to Cedar Grove one afternoon, while Benjamin thought I was at a doctor's appointment. The reality was shocking. The facility was run-down, understaffed, and had an unmistakable institutional feel. Residents looked neglected, sitting in wheelchairs in hallways with little stimulation or attention. The rooms were tiny and sterile, nothing like the spacious home-like apartments Benjamin had described. A sympathetic nurse, noticing our expressions as we toured the public areas, pulled us aside. "Are you considering this place for yourself or a loved one?" she asked quietly. When I explained the situation, she glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "If you have any other options, take them. We're chronically understaffed, and the management cuts corners everywhere they can. I'm actually putting in my notice next week." I thanked her for her honesty and left with Thomas, more determined than ever to fight Benjamin's plans. The confrontation came to a head when Benjamin arrived the following weekend with papers for me to sign. He spread them across the kitchen table with an air of finality. "These authorize the sale of the house and your transition to Cedar Grove," he explained, handing me a pen. "I've already packed most of your essential items. The moving truck comes next Tuesday." I set the pen down without signing. "Benjamin, I'm not selling this house, and I'm certainly not moving to Cedar Grove." His friendly facade finally cracked. "This isn't a discussion, Dad. I have power of attorney now. I can make these decisions for you if necessary." "Power of attorney fraudulently obtained," I corrected him. "I've spoken to the real estate agent who called. I know what you did." Benjamin's face flushed with anger. "You're not thinking clearly. This house is too much for you. The money from the sale will pay for your care and help settle some other matters." "Your gambling debts, you mean?" His eyes widened slightly before narrowing. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I found the emails, Benjamin. I know everything. The loan applications, the apartment deposit, the correspondence with Cedar Grove, where you specifically asked about their cheapest available room, not their best." Benjamin's expression transformed completely, any pretense of concern vanishing. "You had no right to go through my emails. And you had no right to forge my signature or try to sell my home without my consent. For a moment, I thought he might deny everything, but instead he shifted to justification. I deserve that money more than some nursing home. Do you have any idea what I've been dealing with? I'm underwater on everything. My credit is destroyed. So your solution is to sell my home and warehouse me in a substandard facility. Your mother would be heartbroken. Mom is dead, he snapped. And she left next to nothing for me after everything I've done for you both. I stared at my son, barely recognizing the person before me. What exactly have you done for us, Benjamin? You rarely visited your mother when she was dying. You've never held a steady job or supported yourself fully as an adult. We've bailed you out financially dozens of times. I'm your only child, he said, as if that fact alone entitled him to everything we had worked for. Yes, and I love you because of that, but I cannot allow you to take advantage of me this way. Benjamin gathered the papers from the table, his movements sharp with anger. You don't have a choice. I've already spoken with an elder law attorney. If you don't cooperate, I'll petition for guardianship on grounds of mental incompetence. One neurological evaluation showing any slight impairment which is common at your age, and I'll have complete control. Get out of my house, I said quietly. This house will be sold whether you like it or not, Benjamin replied, heading toward the door. Start packing, old man. You have 1 week. As the door slammed behind him, I stood in the kitchen. My wife and I had shared for decades now the sight of this painful betrayal. I had hoped Benjamin was simply misguided in his concern, but the truth was far worse. My son was willing to sacrifice my well-being for his financial gain. The time for hoping he would come around had passed. Now I needed to act. The morning after our confrontation, I called Julia from a coffee shop rather than my home phone, suspecting Benjamin might be monitoring my calls. She agreed to meet me at her office that afternoon. I was afraid something like this might happen, Julia said after I explained the situation. Margaret was concerned about Benjamin's reaction to the will. That's why she took the precautions she did. I showed Julia the emails I had printed from Benjamin's account and explained about the forged power of attorney documents. This is serious, Dylan, she said, her expression grave. Forging a power of attorney is fraud. And if he's already trying to sell your house using these documents, that compounds the offense. Julia explained my options. We could immediately file for a temporary restraining order against Benjamin to prevent him from entering my property. We could report the forged documents to the police. We could contact the real estate agent and any potential buyers to inform them the sale was fraudulent. But there's something else to consider, Julia added. Do you want to pursue criminal charges against your son? Once we start down that road, it will be difficult to turn back. Despite everything, the thought of seeing Benjamin arrested and possibly imprisoned was painful. He was still my child, Margaret's son. I asked if there was another approach we could take. We can start with legal notifications, Julia suggested. I'll send cease and desist letters to Benjamin, the real estate agent, and Cedar Grove. We'll make it clear that any contracts Benjamin signed on your behalf are invalid. While this would address the immediate issue, we both knew Benjamin wouldn't give up easily. He was desperate and had already shown he was willing to cross legal and ethical lines. Margaret was very wise, Julia said after a thoughtful pause. She set things up so you have options beyond just fighting Benjamin here in Boston. That evening I made another important call from the safety of the coffee shop. This time to Carlos Mendez, the property manager who looked after our Valencia villa. I had met Carlos only a few times during our vacations, but Margaret had spoken with him regularly to maintain the property. Senor Williams, I was so sorry to hear about Senora Margaret, Carlos said when he recognized my voice. She was a wonderful lady. I thanked him and explained that I was considering coming to Valencia for an extended stay, perhaps permanently. Could he check on the villa and make sure everything was in order? Of course, senor. The house is always maintained as Senora Margaret instructed. When might you be arriving? Within 2 weeks, I told him. And Carlos, I'd appreciate your discretion. My son doesn't know about the house, and I'd like to keep it that way for now. With Julia handling the legal side and Carlos preparing the Valencia villa, I turned to the practical matters of my escape plan. First, I needed to secure my finances. Following Julia's advice, I opened a new bank account at a different institution than the one Benjamin and I had used for years. I transferred a substantial portion of my funds, leaving enough in the original account to avoid suspicion. Julia helped me set up automatic transfers from Margaret's secret pension fund directly to my new account. Next came the matter of personal belongings. I couldn't take much with me to Spain, but certain items held too much sentimental value to leave behind. Margaret's jewelry, our wedding album, the hand-drawn birthday cards Benjamin had made as a child showing the innocent boy he once was. I carefully packed these treasures in an inconspicuous duffel bag and stored it at Thomas's house for safekeeping. Throughout this process, I maintained the appearance of defeat whenever Benjamin visited. I would sigh heavily, move slowly, and mention how exhausting packing was becoming. I even started filling boxes with items I had no intention of taking, just to maintain the illusion. Benjamin seemed pleased with my apparent compliance, even offering to help by taking some of Margaret's antiques to store for me. I knew I would never see those items again, but they were a small price to pay for keeping him unsuspicious. While Benjamin thought I was preparing to move to Cedar Grove, I was actually making arrangements for Spain. I purchased a one-way ticket to Valencia, scheduled to depart the day before Benjamin expected to move me to the nursing home. I arranged for international shipping of a few essential items that would arrive after I was settled. I even enrolled in an online Spanish language course, completing the lessons each night after Benjamin left. The trickiest part was ensuring my ongoing health needs would be met in Spain. I had Julia connect me with an international health insurance provider that would cover me as an American expatriate. I had my doctor send copies of my medical records to my new email account and obtained 3 months' worth of my regular prescriptions to tide me over until I could establish care with a Spanish physician. As my departure date approached, I spent time saying quiet goodbyes to the places that had defined my life with Margaret. I visited our favorite restaurant one last time. I walked through the public garden where we had spent countless Sunday afternoons. I sat in the back pew of our church during a quiet weekday morning. These farewells were bittersweet. I was leaving behind decades of memories, friends who had become like family, and a city I knew as intimately as my own reflection. Yet Spain represented not just escape from Benjamin's schemes, but the beginning of something Margaret and I had dreamed about together. The night before my planned departure, I walked through our Boston home one final time. In the master bedroom, I ran my hand across Margaret's side of the bed, still perfectly made with her favorite quilt. In Benjamin's childhood room, I looked at the height marks on the doorframe, tracking his growth. In the kitchen, I stood where Margaret and I had danced on our 40th anniversary, the radio playing our wedding song. Finally, I sat at Margaret's desk and wrote a letter to Benjamin. I explained that I knew about his plans and had made arrangements of my own. I expressed my profound disappointment, but also my enduring love for him as my son. I outlined the legal consequences he might face for his actions, but indicated I would not press charges if he ceased his efforts immediately. I ended by saying I hoped someday we might rebuild what had been broken, but that would depend on his choices going forward. I sealed the letter in an envelope marked with Benjamin's name and left it propped against the family photo on the mantel. He would find it after discovering I was gone. With my heart heavy but my resolve firm, I went to bed in our Boston home for what I knew would be the last time. Tomorrow would bring a text message from Benjamin that would set the final act in motion. Little did he know I was already several steps ahead. The morning of my planned departure arrived with the ping of an incoming text. Benjamin's message was just as I had anticipated. Dad, start packing. The house has been sold. Movers coming tomorrow at 9 a.m. for the big stuff. Be ready. I smiled at my phone, knowing my bags were indeed packed, but not for the destination Benjamin had in mind. I responded simply, I'll be ready to leave by the end of the day. My phone rang almost immediately. Benjamin, clearly surprised by my acquiescence after weeks of resistance. You're not going to fight me on this? He asked, suspicion evident in his voice. I'm tired of fighting, son, I replied, making my voice sound defeated. You're right. The house is too much for me now. There was a pause before Benjamin spoke again, triumph poorly disguised as concern. I'm glad you're being reasonable, Dad. Cedar Grove isn't so bad. You'll adjust quickly. I'm sure I will, I said, offering no further resistance. I'll come by around 7 tonight to help with any last-minute packing, Benjamin added. The moving truck will take most things to storage. You can just bring clothes and personal items to Cedar Grove. I agreed to this plan and ended the call, checking my watch. My flight to Valencia was scheduled for 5 p.m. Benjamin wouldn't arrive until 7. Perfect timing. My morning was spent finishing the last details of my plan. I called Thomas, who would drive me to the airport. I made a final transfer from my old bank account to the new one. I had one last call with Julia to confirm all legal documents were in place. As soon as you're safely in Spain, I'll deliver the cease and desist notices, she assured me. I've also prepared documentation for the police regarding the forged power of attorney, but won't file unless absolutely necessary. Thank you for everything, Julia, I said sincerely. Margaret chose her friends wisely. At noon, Thomas arrived to help with my luggage, 2 suitcases containing everything I would need until my shipped items arrived in Valencia. As he loaded them into his car, Mrs. Jenkins waved from across the street. Going somewhere, Dylan, she called. Just a little trip, I replied vaguely. Thomas is helping me with some errands. I had considered telling my neighbors the truth, but decided against it. The fewer people who knew my destination, the less chance of Benjamin discovering it prematurely. We stopped for lunch at a small diner Margaret and I had frequented throughout our marriage. The owner, Angelo, knew us well and had attended Margaret's funeral. You look different today, Dylan, he remarked as he refilled my coffee cup. There's a spark in your eye I haven't seen since before Margaret got sick. I'm starting a new chapter. I told him, which was true enough without revealing details. Angelo patted my shoulder. Margaret would be happy to hear that. First meals on the house when you get back from wherever you're going. By 3:30, we were on our way to Logan International Airport. Traffic was lighter than expected, giving us plenty of time for a proper goodbye at the departure terminal. You sure about this, Dylan? Thomas asked, concern etched on his face. It's not too late to change your mind. I've never been more certain, I assured him. Margaret and I dreamed of spending our retirement years in Valencia. I'm just following through on that dream, albeit alone. Thomas embraced me tightly. Not alone. You have friends there waiting for you and friends here who will visit, including me once you're settled. With one last look at the Boston skyline in the distance, I entered the terminal and headed for the international departures check-in. By 4:30, I was through security and waiting at my gate, feeling a peculiar mixture of grief, excitement, and vindication. Just before boarding began, my phone buzzed with another text from Benjamin leaving work early. We'll be at the house by 6 instead of 7. My heart raced momentarily before I calmed myself. Even with this change, I would be in the air before Benjamin discovered my absence. I turned off my phone as they called my flight for boarding. The last glimpse of American soil disappeared beneath the clouds as our plane ascended. I closed my eyes, imagining Margaret beside me, her hand in mine as we embarked on this adventure together. In some ways, she was still guiding me, her foresight, having made this escape possible. Meanwhile, I could picture the scene unfolding at our Boston home. Benjamin would arrive to find the house empty. He would call my phone repeatedly, receiving only voicemail. Eventually, he would notice the letter on the mantel and learn that his plan had failed. What I couldn't predict was how he would react. Would he be furious, remorseful? Would he respect my wishes or escalate his efforts? Only time would tell. The consequences for Benjamin were already in motion. By morning, Julia would ensure that the real estate agent, potential buyers, and Cedar Grove all received legal notification that any contracts signed by Benjamin were fraudulent. The bank would be informed that the power of attorney document was forged. Benjamin's scheme would collapse entirely. As for the Boston house, it would remain mine. Julia would arrange for a property management company to maintain it until I decided whether to sell it legitimately or keep it as a link to my past life. Either way, the decision would be mine alone, not Benjamin's. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I allowed myself to truly relax for the first time in weeks. The immediate battle was won. Benjamin had tried to control my future to take advantage of what he perceived as weakness. But Margaret's love and protection extended beyond her life, giving me the resources to reclaim my autonomy. The most painful realization was how thoroughly I had failed as a parent. Somewhere along the way, Margaret and I had raised a son who valued money over family, who saw his father as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be cherished. That knowledge would always hurt, but I had to accept my role in creating the situation. Perhaps this dramatic break would serve as the wake-up call Benjamin needed. Without access to what he thought would be an easy financial solution, he would be forced to confront his own problems and hopefully find more honorable solutions. It wasn't the lesson I would have chosen to teach my son, but it was the one circumstances had forced upon us both. As the plane carried me toward my new life, I silently thanked Margaret for her wisdom and love. She had known our son better than I had allowed myself to. She had prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. Now I would honor her memory by living the life we had planned together, even if I would be living it alone. The Spanish sunrise greeted me my first morning in Valencia, golden light spilling through windows that overlooked the Mediterranean. Carlos had prepared the villa perfectly with fresh linens, stocked refrigerator, and vases of local flowers throughout. After the emotional turbulence of recent weeks, the peace was almost disorienting. Our Valencia home was modest by American standards, but perfect for one or two people. The main floor featured an open-concept living area with a small kitchen and dining space that flowed onto a terrace. The bedroom upstairs had its own balcony where Margaret and I had often enjoyed morning coffee with views of distant fishing boats. The garden was small but lush, with citrus trees and flowering vines that Sophia, our elderly neighbor, had helped Margaret plant years ago. Sophia welcomed me with a warm embrace and tears in her eyes when she learned of Margaret's passing. Despite our language barrier, she expressed her condolences, clearly bringing homemade paella that evening and sitting with me as I showed her photos of Margaret's final months. Within days, Carlos introduced me to other American expatriates in the area. There was Richard, a retired professor from Chicago who had moved to Spain after his wife's death 10 years earlier. Diane and Paul, a couple from Seattle who had sold everything to live their dream retirement on the Mediterranean coast. Janet, a widow from Florida who taught English at a local school 3 days a week, just to keep my mind sharp, as she put it. This small community immediately embraced me, understanding the complex emotions of starting over in a new country later in life. They showed me the best local markets, introduced me to their favorite cafes, and helped navigate the practical matters of Spanish banking and healthcare systems. 2 weeks after my arrival, I received an email from Julia with updates from Boston. As planned, she had delivered cease and desist notices to all parties involved in Benjamin's scheme. The real estate agency had immediately withdrawn the listing for my house upon learning the power of attorney was fraudulent. Cedar Grove had confirmed they would cancel the reservation Benjamin had made. Most significantly, Benjamin had received formal notification that his actions were potentially criminal. Julia had made it clear that while I wasn't currently pressing charges, evidence had been preserved should his behavior continue. Benjamin came to my office yesterday, Julia wrote. He was initially angry and threatening, demanding to know where you've gone. When I explained the legal consequences he's facing, his demeanor changed completely. He asked me to tell you he's sorry and wants to talk when you're ready. I read this with mixed emotions. Benjamin's apology seemed motivated more by self-preservation than genuine remorse. Still, it was a start. I asked Julia to tell him I needed time and would contact him when I was ready. The property management company reported that Benjamin had returned the few items he had taken from the house. They had changed the locks and installed a security system as I had requested. My Boston life was secure, waiting for whatever decisions I might make about it in the future. With these practical matters resolved, I turned my attention to building my new life in Valencia. I enrolled in formal Spanish language classes 3 mornings a week. Though I would never achieve native fluency at my age, within months I could handle basic conversations at shops and restaurants. The adjustment wasn't always easy. Some nights I would wake reaching for Margaret, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. Holidays were particularly difficult, each celebration highlighting her absence. Yet there was healing in this new environment, where every street didn't hold memories of our shared past. I discovered unexpected joy in volunteering at a local community center where Richard taught art classes to children. My architectural background proved useful as I helped students design and build small structures from recyclable materials. The children's creativity and enthusiasm were contagious, giving my days purpose and structure. Sophia's grandson, Miguel, a local contractor, hired me as a consultant on several renovation projects involving historic buildings. This part-time work kept my mind engaged, while allowing me to explore Valencia's architectural heritage that had so enchanted Margaret and me on our first visit. As months passed, I established comfortable routines. Morning walks along the beach, Spanish lessons, lunch with fellow expatriates, afternoons spent volunteering or consulting, evenings on my terrace, watching the sunset, often joined by neighbors who became true friends. The pain of Benjamin's betrayal gradually dulled, though it never disappeared entirely. 1 year after my arrival in Spain, I received an unexpected letter with a Boston postmark. Benjamin's handwriting on the envelope sent a jolt of anxiety through me. For several days, I left it unopened on my desk, unsure whether I wanted to revisit that painful chapter. Finally, on a quiet Sunday morning, I sat on my terrace with a cup of coffee and opened my son's letter. "Dear Dad," it began. "It's taken me a year to find the courage to write this. First, I want to say how deeply sorry I am for what I did. There's no excuse for my behavior after Mom died. I was drowning in gambling debts and saw you and the house as my way out. It was selfish, dishonest, and cruel." Benjamin explained that after Julia confronted him with the legal consequences of his actions, he had finally hit rock bottom. He had joined Gamblers Anonymous the following week and had now been clean for 11 months. He had found steady work at an insurance company and was slowly rebuilding his credit and paying off his debts. "I don't expect forgiveness," he continued. "What I did was unforgivable. I just wanted you to know that losing you and nearly facing criminal charges woke me up to what I was becoming. Mom would have been so ashamed, and truthfully, I was ashamed too." The letter ended simply, "I hope you're happy wherever you are. If you ever want to contact me, my information is below. If not, I understand. Either way, I'm grateful that you didn't press charges when you had every right to do so. Love, Benjamin." I read the letter several times, emotions swirling. There was relief that Benjamin seemed to be turning his life around, caution about whether this change was genuine, and lingering hurt from his betrayal. I decided not to respond immediately, but tucked the letter away to reconsider when my feelings were clearer. 2 months later, I sent Benjamin a short email. I didn't share my location, but told him I was well and glad to hear he was making positive changes. This began a cautious, intermittent correspondence. I remained vague about my whereabouts, and he respected my privacy, never pressing for details. Over the next year, our communication gradually increased. Benjamin shared his continued progress with gambling recovery and his promotion at work. I told him about my volunteer work with children and consulting on architectural projects without specifying where. Slowly, cautiously, we rebuilt a fragile connection. 3 years after leaving Boston, I invited Benjamin to meet me in Madrid. Neutral territory seemed appropriate for our first face-to-face reunion. When we met in the hotel lobby, I was struck by how much he had aged. His hair had thinned and grayed significantly, and worry lines etched his face. He seemed genuinely nervous, a far cry from the confident manipulator who had tried to sell my house. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come," he admitted as we sat down for coffee. "I wasn't either until the plane took off," I replied honestly. Our conversation was awkward at first, but gradually eased as we established new boundaries. Benjamin formally apologized again for his actions, this time looking me in the eye with what appeared to be genuine remorse. I acknowledged his apology without offering complete absolution. Some wounds were still too fresh. After 2 days in Madrid, I made a decision. I invited Benjamin to visit me in Valencia to see the life his mother and I had planned together. His surprise at learning about our Spanish home was evident. "Mom never mentioned this place," he said as we stood on my terrace overlooking the Mediterranean. "We kept it private," I explained. "Something just for us after decades of putting everyone else first." Benjamin nodded slowly, perhaps understanding for the first time how his parents had lives and dreams independent of him. "It's beautiful. Mom would have loved retiring here. She did love it during the time she had," I corrected gently. That visit marked a turning point in our relationship. Not a return to what was before, nothing could accomplish that, but the beginning of something new, something more honest with clearer boundaries and mutual respect. Today, 5 years after leaving Boston, I divide my time between Valencia and occasional visits to the States. I sold the Boston house, eventually donating a portion of the proceeds to a gambling addiction treatment center at Benjamin's suggestion. Benjamin visits Valencia twice yearly, sometimes bringing friends he's made through his recovery program. Our relationship remains a work in progress, but it is progress nonetheless. The profound lessons of this journey have shaped my final chapter. I learned that sometimes love means setting boundaries even with those closest to you. I learned that starting over is possible at any age when necessity demands it. I learned that Margaret's quiet wisdom extended far beyond her lifetime, protecting me even after she was gone. Most importantly, I learned that silence can sometimes be the most powerful response to betrayal. By staying quiet about our Spanish home and Margaret's provisions for me, I was able to escape a situation that would have destroyed me. Not all secrets are harmful. Some, like ours, are shields against those who would take advantage of vulnerability. As I sit on my terrace watching another Mediterranean sunset, I feel Margaret's presence beside me. I imagine her smile of approval at how I handled Benjamin's betrayal with dignity rather than vengeance. I like to think she would be pleased that Benjamin and I have found a path toward reconciliation, however tentative. For those of you facing similar family conflicts or betrayals, remember that sometimes the wisest response isn't confrontation but strategic silence. Create your own safety net. Protect yourself first, and know that even in your 70s, as I am now, life can offer beautiful new beginnings when you have the courage to pursue them. Where are you watching from today? Have you ever had to protect yourself from someone you loved? How did you handle it? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences. And remember, sometimes the best response isn't what you say, but what you strategically keep to yourself. Thank you for listening, and may you find peace in whatever challenges you're facing today.